Hey everyone, Poindexter here, and we continue our playthrough of the solitaire wargame Western Front Ace. In the last video, Lieutenant Daladier scored 3 victories in 2 patrols, became an ace, and was awarded 2 medals. His new scout, the SPAD 13, was no small reason for the success. So, let's get started and see if we can continue building on that success. Albert's next mission will be a balloon busting mission. We'll need to fly to no man's land and engage enemy observation balloons just behind the front lines. We'll be armed with incendiary ammunition and cannot target enemy two-seaters, but can defend ourselves if attacked by scouts. Albert takes off, and we check for our first encounter and spot enemy two-seaters, but we must ignore them due to the mission requirements. We move to friendly territory and check for encounters once again, but we encounter no enemy aircraft. Albert makes it to no man's land and begins his attack on the balloon. First, we check to see if we encounter any anti-aircraft as we make our attack run. A roll of 1 means we are attacked by AA fire, and we suffer 6 hits. And in a repeat of our last balloon busting mission, our forward guns are knocked out, with several hits to the tail, port struts, and landing gear. We cannot fire at the balloon, but we did make an attack, so we receive credit for the mission. But we must suffer another anti-aircraft attack as we fly away, and 2 more hits are scored. And the engine and starboard struts are hit as we make our escape. With his wounded SPAD, Albert flies into friendly territory, and we check for enemy encounters, and the skies are clear of aircraft. Albert now has the airfield in sight, and we check for our final encounter. Fortunately, no enemy scouts are spotted. We now check the weather, and the weather is socked in, adding a +3 to the landing roll. We add a +1 because of the damaged landing gear, and apply Albert's landing skill for a -1, which leaves us with a +3 modifier. It's a 4, modified to 7, and Albert lands safely. Albert's SPAD received 7 hits and is written off, but he receives a replacement in time for the next patrol. The success of the balloon busting mission gives us credit for the equivalent of 2 patrols for experience point purposes, and Albert is now only 1 patrol away from gaining another experience point. Albert's last patrol of July will be a line patrol, requiring us to fly to no man's land and patrol the area. Albert takes off, and we check for our first encounter, and no enemy aircraft are spotted. We move to friendly territory and check for enemy aircraft, and again, no enemy aircraft. Albert begins his patrol over no man's land, and he scans the sky for enemy scouts and spots an enemy two-seater instead. The aircraft are Rumpler C-4s, and combat begins head-on. Albert decides to give his wingman a crack at the two-seater. Albert fires and scores 5 hits. Albert's wingman also attacks, and he scores 4 hits but is damaged in the process. The Rumpler decides to go defensive and avoids all damage by going evasive. Fortunately for us, our precision skill saves us from using ammo in this botched attack. We now determine final initiative. The Rumpler has a base initiative of 12 and 15 for the SPAD, and both aircraft tie at 17 and remain head-on. Albert will use reflexes to fire first in this combat round and will not use his wingman. He fires, and his guns jam, but our weapons maintenance skill overrides the jam result. Albert scores 5 hits. The fuel tank is struck twice, with a third hitting the struts. First, we roll for the severity of the fuel tank hits. The first hit only causes the leak, as well as the second hit. Regardless, the fuel tank hits force the Rumpler to make an emergency landing, and since we're over no man's land, it counts as a victory, bringing Albert's total to 7. Albert decides to head home and moves into friendly territory. We check for enemy encounters, but no encounter takes place. Albert is now within sight of the airfield, and we check our final encounter. And Albert spots another flight of enemy two-seaters. The aircraft are Roland C-2s, and the encounter begins head-on. Albert decides to attack. He fires and scores 4 hits, plus an extra hit to a crew member. But Roland decides to go defensive and performs a barrel roll, avoiding 2 of the hits. 1 hit strikes the forward gun, with the other hitting the landing gear for no effect. Though there is no damage space for forward weapons on the 2-seater aircraft mat, we'll apply it in this case as we are using the optional 2-seater firing rule. In this case, the 2-seater's forward gun is damaged, and he will go completely defensive from this point on. Since we scored a hit on the 2-seater, we now determine which of the crew were hit. And the pilot was the victim of the attack. And he is killed. With a dead pilot at the controls, the Roland crashes not far from the airfield. And Albert scores another victory. Albert prepares to land, and we check the weather. And the weather is poor, adding a +1 to the landing roll. But Albert's landing skill negates the penalty, so it's an automatic safe landing. We make note of Albert's successful patrol in the log. With this patrol, Albert gains another experience point. With 3 points, we'll purchase the 6th Sense skill, and can rest a little easier knowing that the combat cards cannot kill us outright any longer. Lieutenant Daladier is also awarded a 2nd Bronze Palm for his Croix de Guerre, for downing 2 aircraft in 1 patrol, and gains another prestige point. With that, we've reached the end of the video. Lieutenant Daladier continues scoring victories and gaining prestige, with July being the best month of his career so far. With the 6th Sense skill now in play, Albert now has a slightly better chance of survival. It's no lucky charm, but it's better than nothing. If Albert can avoid serious damage to his SPAD, he should be fine. But, as you can see throughout this playthrough, no pilot is ever truly safe in combat during the Great War. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next patrol.